All right, welcome back to another set of lectures here. We're talking about Native American sites before European contact. This is going to be topic 1.2, and then a little bit later on in this video, we're also going to talk about 1.3. So first, with Native American societies, we're going to focus on their interactions with geography and the environment. And so the learning objective is to explain how and why various native populations in the period before European contact interacted with the natural environment in North America. The first key concept here is the spread of maize cultivation from present-day Mexico northward into the present-day American Southwest and beyond supported economic development, settlement, advanced irrigation, and social diversification among societies. So first thing to get here is the word maize, that is corn. And the corn that these native societies used to plant looks very much like the one that you see on the screen. It's very colorful. It would take many centuries and genetic modification of strains of corn to get it to look like the corn that you and I eat today. This began in Mesoamerica, present-day Mexico, with the Aztecs. So they were able to establish their large civilization through the use of corn plantations. Remember, their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was built on top of a lake on marshy land, and they utilized that marshy lands to create these irrigation channels to plant the corn. The little islands that would be created out of these channels in which they would plant were called chinampas. And through the use of these canals and irrigation channels, they were able to feed as many as 20 million people across the entire Aztec Empire. The use of corn went up north through North America, reaching the Anasazi or the Pueblo people in modern day New Mexico, even as far north as Colorado. We see these cave dwellers who are using agriculture and planting things like corn into the Mississippi River Valley with the Cahokia mound builders. And you can see an example of what their civilization used to look like. So again, it's settled, it's highly dense in population, and the only way in which you can get that many people living in one area is if you have the ability to feed them. And so through the use of irrigation and these infrastructure projects, that became a possibility. So our next key concept here is societies responded to the aridity of the Great Basin and the grasslands of the Western Great Plains by developing largely mobile lifestyle. So the first thing we need to establish is exactly where the Great Plains are. And so on the map to the right here, you see that it goes as far west as California and Oregon, as far east as Colorado and Wyoming, and then the southern edge is the north of Arizona, and the northern edge is Montana and Idaho. And a lot of these places, even today, are still very hot. And so that heat, that warm climate, that lack of rain definitely affected the way in which Native Americans lived in these areas. And so they lived in very nomadic ways. Um, where the Great Salt Lake is now, there used to be a massive lake called Lake Bonneville, which was created as a result of the receding ice caps from the Ice Age. And once it started to dry out is when you start to have these groups become more and more nomadic, because as there's less rain, there's less water in the area, there's less chances for precipitation, and so they become more nomadic. Here you can see in this picture elements of that nomadic lifestyle. You see that the shelter that they're using seems very lightweight, made up of light materials. So at any moment, they could pick up and move to another area. At the same time, they are showing behaviors of people who are sedentary, which means that they are doing things that are like agriculture. What they're doing here is they're drying grains that they have grown. So just because you're nomadic doesn't mean that you can't practice agriculture. They did both. Some of the tribes that you should know in the Great Plains are the Paiute, the Shoshone, and the Ute. In the map, you can see even more. And then the next part of this key concept is the Great Plains. So the Great Plains go as far north as southern Canada and as far south as Texas. And in the Great Plains, they had a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Again, some of the land was not conducive to agriculture, but there are other resources that Native Americans were able to use. And in the northern plains, you have bison. And so even before they had horses, even before they had guns with gunpowder, Native Americans were still able to hunt bison. And so one of the things that they would do is they would herd bison very slowly on foot towards an area with a cliff or a bluff. And then because bison are very skittish, they would just scare the bison into a stampede, and then not knowing where they were in the heat of the moment, they would run off a cliff. And there'd be no way of stopping because there were bison behind them. And so as soon as they fell off the cliff, there would be other Native Americans below the cliff waiting for them, and that's where they would strike. And so this is the North Plains region. Bison had been an important resource for them very early on before the Europeans had gotten there. Once the Europeans come in and introduce the use of gunpowder and weapons and horses, then their bison hunting is going to go to another level. Moving on, so in the Northeast, the Mississippi River Valley and along the Atlantic seaboard, some societies developed mixed agricultural and hunter-gatherer economies that favored the development of permanent villages. So in the Southeast here, you're starting to be able to see a lot more names on the map, which means that there's more people that are settling down. And so some of the eastern tribes, like the Creek and the Cherokee, had some of the highest population densities across the entire Southeast. And they did so through the use of Three Sisters farming. In the Northeast, we've talked about the Iroquois. They are the most powerful group up there. They gained dominance through their political alliances, and they developed a matrilineal society. So that means that once a couple got married, it was the man that would go and live with the woman's family. Hunting would normally be done by the men, and the agriculture would normally be done by the women. And because they were key to this part of sustaining the tribe, they in turn got a lot of political power within the group. We also talked about controlled burns in the last lecture. They would burn parts of the forest in order to clear the forest floor, made it easier for them to continue to hunt in those areas, and it also encouraged the growth of some of the larger trees. So on the bottom left, you have an example of an important Iroquois woman. She won't actually be seen until the next historical period, but Molly Brant did a lot to continue have the Iroquois continue to maintain their sovereignty over the region into the 18th century. And on the bottom right, you have an example of how the Iroquois would clear part of the forest and then have it adapt to their lifestyle. Last region that we're going to talk about is the Northwest and present-day California. So the key concept says societies in the Northwest and present-day California supported themselves by hunting and gathering. In some areas developed settled communities supported by the vast resources of the ocean. Again, you're starting to see a lot more names here on the map of all the native groups, especially in California. California is plentiful in resources and great climate, and because of that, California had some of the highest population densities of natives out of the entire North America. There were an estimated 1 million Native Americans in California before European contact. Subsistence also included of hunting, gathering in the forest, using controlled burns to facilitate hunting and encouraging plant growth. We see fishing in many of the rivers that start from the Sierras going out to the Pacific Ocean. And some of the tribes that you can be familiar with here are the Chumash, the Mono, the Yurok, and the Tillamook. The Tillamook are actually further up north into Oregon. But the picture on on the right here is one from the Redwood National Forest. Kind of gives you an idea of the environment that they were living in. You have these huge sequoia and redwood trees in Central California and Northern California that would be spotted with marshes in which there would be wildlife that they could hunt and eat. All right, and so then the next topic here is 1.3, European exploration in the Americas. The theme that we're looking at is America in the world. And the learning objective for this topic is explain the causes of exploration and conquest of the New World by various European nations. So now we're starting to see more on the side of the Europeans that came to North America and South America. The first key concept is European nations' effort to explore and conquer the New World stemmed from a search for new sources of wealth, economic and military competition, and a desire to spread Christianity. So this goes all the way back to the Crusades of the 10th to the 13th century, in which the Catholic powers were trying to retake the Holy Land in Jerusalem. And while they were there, they were being exposed to new goods like spices and um, silk and other textiles. And they ended up wanting to have more of these goods be brought to Western Europe. And in order to do so, they had to travel very long overland distances or very complicated overland and sea routes. And because the shipping lanes were so far away, it cost a lot of money and it was not very profitable for people to do so. So they began to try to look for a better way or a better route that they could control so it's not as expensive. And this is where the Portuguese begin to look for a route that goes across or around Africa. So in 1488, Portuguese are able to navigate to the very tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. And then by 1498, Vasco da Gama is able to circumnavigate the African continent and reach India. At the same time, in 1492, Christopher Columbus is awarded a grant, ships, and a crew by the Spanish crown to go to Asia via the Atlantic. So Christopher Columbus's theory was that the world was not just round, but it was smaller than people had estimated it to be. And so you could make a trip across the Atlantic and reach Asia no problem. Well, it turned out that there was another set of continents in between Europe and Asia. So he ended up reaching the Bahamas. And he made 3 separate trips after his initial trip. And each single time that he kept going back, he was under the impression that he had reached the East Indies. So that's the area of Southeast Asia. That's what they used to call the East Indies. He called the people that he encountered in the New World Indians because he continued to believe that he was in the Eastern Hemisphere. But in fact, he was in the Caribbean. So the European nations' effort to explore and conquer the New World stemmed from a search for new sources of wealth, economic and military competition, and a desire to spread Christianity. So we've talked about how Europeans wanted wealth and wanted new goods, but once they find this new land and these new people, there are more motives to continue to explore. So once news reached Europe about the new continent, people, and its precious resources, interest in the New World increased. Ferdinand and Isabella continued to send explorers down so that they could convert all the people that they encountered, get the gold that they had seen evidence of. And so Ferdinand and Isabella, who had just to reconquer the Iberian Peninsula, the territory of Spain, were very, from Muslim rulers, they were very interested in continuing to spread Catholicism. So like I said, there was evidence of gold in the New World. When Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean, he bounced around the islands of what is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti and Cuba. And he saw that the Taino people that lived there had some jewelry or necklaces that showed signs of gold. And so they wanted to go out and find where they had found this gold. And all of this search for gold stemmed from the rivalry with the Portuguese. So the rivalry with Portugal and the possibility of precious metals like gold fueled further exploration. The geography of the Caribbean where Columbus landed was more favorable to sugarcane plantation, but as the Spanish continue to send more explorers into North and South America, they are going to find this gold. So the pictures that you see here are examples of gold from the Aztec and the Incan empires, and the bottom right illustration are the Taino people that are being used as labor to extract gold and bring it back to the Spanish. All right, and so finally, a quick recap here. The importance of maize agriculture and its effect on native societies is going to be really important. It's what lets the native societies grow their population before the Europeans arrive. You got to know characteristics of all the native groups across all the climate and geographic regions of the modern day United States. So the Great Basin, the Great Plains, the Atlantic Coast, and the Pacific Coast. Know the difference, know at least one example of each group. And you also got to remember what motivated European explorers to come to the New World and not just explore, but to conquer and try to convert the people whom they meet. So that is it for this set of lectures. Next time we will continue on with period 1, and I will see you then.